Well, most of us probably remember Jesus' statement, I am the way and the truth and the life. When we talk about that statement, though, it seems like we generally focus on the first part of it, where Jesus says, I am the way. What we don't focus on as much is the second part, because Jesus also said, I am the truth. Now, truth is very important. We'd all agree to that, I think. We pay lip service to it all the time. We say honesty is the best policy. We tell kids all the time, we want you to tell the truth. And most of us probably are truthful. Well, most of the time, anyway. And in saying that, I don't mean to imply that we're all a bunch of liars or anything. What I mean is that sometimes telling the truth can be really hard. And sometimes telling the truth can get us into a lot of trouble. And this leads us into our sermon series, The Paradoxical Commandments. This is the fifth in the series. It's a series of statements written by Dr. Kent M. Keith, endorsed by Mother Teresa. I've got the list sitting on the back table there. The commandment for today is, honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. And this can be true in at least a couple of ways, maybe more. And one of them is the subject of our Bible reading today from 1 Kings. Now in that reading, we have the king of Israel and the king of Judah getting together and talking about going to war against the king of Aram because they think Aram has some territory that rightly belongs to Israel and Judah. As a side note, there's another way that the Bible shows nothing much has changed about human nature and human society in the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. But anyway, at this point, the Jewish people have slipped away from God to a large extent, but they still think that before they go to war, they better find out what the Lord has to say about it. So they call the prophets together. All the prophets say, go for it. But the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, knows that something is wrong here. We're not told how he knows, but somehow he knows these people are not really prophets of the Lord. So he asks, is there no longer a prophet of the Lord here that we can inquire of? Well, there is. His name is Micaiah. But the king of Israel says, you don't want to talk to him. He always prophesies bad stuff about me. But Jehoshaphat insists, so they call Micaiah. Sure enough, Micaiah says that God says this is all going to end in disaster. And for his trouble, he gets thrown into prison and given only bread and water. Micaiah was frank. Micaiah was honest. It made him vulnerable, just like Dr. Keith said. Must have been tempting for Micaiah to just tell the kings what they wanted to hear. In fact, we're told that at first he did, and it's hard to know how to read that exactly. I've always thought that maybe Micaiah was just being sarcastic there. He knew that nobody would believe him when he said that. But we don't know that. Could be that Micaiah was trying to save himself some trouble by telling these kings what he knew they wanted to hear. But when they called him on it, he told them the truth. And it was the truth. If we had read just a little farther into 1 Kings, you'd have seen that the war did in fact end in disaster for them, just as Micaiah had said. We don't know what happened to Micaiah after that. He just drops out of the story. Was he ever released from prison? Did he die there? Did he continue to prophesy? We don't know. All we know is that when it came right down to it, Micaiah was honest and frank with people who did not want to hear what he had to say. He paid a price for it. And you know, the most frustrating thing of all from Micaiah's viewpoint must have been that he did not go looking for trouble here. He did not go up to these two kings and demand that they listen to him. They sent for him. They asked him what the Lord thought. He was just sitting around minding his own business. But they sent for him. They asked him, what does the Lord think about this? They insisted that he give them an honest answer. And they punished him when he did. And I suspect that some of us have been in that situation. Somebody says, you know, I need your honest opinion about this. And you give it to them, and they get mad at you for it. Because it was not the answer they wanted to hear. They said they wanted an honest opinion, but in fact what they wanted was for us to agree with them. It's not easy to be honest and frank with people who don't want to hear what we have to say. And it's especially frustrating when they've asked us to say it. But you know, there's another way in which being honest and frank will make us vulnerable. And that's when we choose Not just to be honest and frank about what we think, but to be honest and frank about who we are. Most of us don't like to reveal just too much about who we are. And there are reasons for that, and some of them are valid ones. After all, there are things about all of our lives that really are nobody else's business. We all have the right to maintain some privacy about ourselves. But there are also times when we're just kind of afraid to reveal too much about ourselves. Sometimes we're afraid that if people know too much about us, they might not like us. Sometimes we're afraid that if people know who we really are, they might not respect us. Sometimes we're afraid that if people could really see all the sides of us that there are to see, they might not love us anymore. So we hide ourselves. We put up a front. We pretend to be somebody that we're not. And sometimes it goes beyond pretending. Sometimes we actually try to be somebody that we're not. Because we've gotten the idea that who we are is really not a very good person to be. Now, don't get me wrong here. We all have room to improve. We should always try to improve. But we should not try to be somebody that we're not. God created each one of us to be who we are. If God had wanted you to be somebody else, he would have created you to be somebody else. If God wanted me to be somebody else, he would have created me to be somebody else. God created you to be you. And God created me to be me. I need to try to be the best me that I can be, but I still need to be me. And you need to be you. It's only by being who we are and by doing our best to be the best person that we can be, the best me that I can be, and the best you that you can be, that we truly honor God. But the thing is that the more honest, the more authentic we are with people, the more vulnerable we make ourselves. If we're putting up a front and somebody does not like us, we can tell ourselves, well, they really don't know who we are, do they? But if we're being who we really are, if we're being honest and authentic with people, and then somebody does not like us, that hurts. That's a personal rejection. It's a rejection that goes to our hearts. Remember the story of Jesus riding triumphantly into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday? People were shouting for him, screaming for him, but they did not know who he really was. They thought he was going to be a conquering king. That was who they wanted him to be. Then, over the next few days, Jesus revealed who he really was. He told Pilate he was a king, but he was not a conquering king. At least not in the way people wanted. He was a sacrificial king. He was a king who was going to die. He told Pilate, everyone who is on the side of truth listens to me. And Pilate responded, what is truth? When Jesus revealed who he really was, he made himself vulnerable. Not just because it meant the Jewish leaders would want to kill him. They wanted to kill him anyway. He made himself vulnerable to rejection from the people. Because the people wanted a conquering king. They did not want a king who was going to submit to the Roman authorities on earth. A king who could be killed. When they found out who Jesus really was, they rejected him. It had to hurt. Even though Jesus knew this was going to happen, it still had to hurt. They had loved Jesus when they thought he was someone he was not. When he revealed who he was, they rejected him. Not only did they reject him, they hated him. They hated him enough to want him dead. But Jesus went through with it. He could have tried to be somebody he was not. He could have been the conquering king that they wanted. He had that kind of power. But that would not have been honest. If Jesus had been that conquering king, he would not have been who he was sent to earth to be. Jesus had the courage to be who he was. He had the courage to be honest and authentic. Jesus had the courage to do that even though it made him vulnerable. Even though it made him vulnerable to the point of being killed. He still did it. And by doing that, Jesus honored God. Jesus did not try to be someone he was not. He was who he was sent to earth to be. And you and I should not try to be somebody that we're not either. We should be who we were created to be. The best of who we were created to be. Now, if we do that, we will be vulnerable, just like Jesus was. But it's the only way that we can be true to ourselves. It's the only way that we can be true to God. And it's the only way that we can honor God. Honesty and frankness do make you vulnerable. But be honest and frank anyway. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. And it's the only way that we can truly honor God. Amen.